Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to the library today. We're here tonight to help celebrate the life of a remarkable woman, Rita Lynch, a native of Macroom. And we're very, very proud and delighted to have our exhibition here in the library. It's running for over a month, for the month of February, and tonight is its official launch. And I would like to thank particularly Mary Davies, who is Rita's daughter, who very kindly offered us the exhibition for the month, and we have it here thanks to her. And tonight we're launching it with the assistance of Evelyn Grant, who I'm sure you all know only too well from Lyric FM. And we'd like to welcome Evelyn to Macroom Library. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheridan.
And thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many here. As we were driving down from Cork, I thought, well, the weather has put paid to this tonight. But it's great to see it, and I think you'll enjoy what Mary has to tell you about this fantastic woman, Rita Lynch. I had the pleasure, Evelyn Grant is my name, but I had the pleasure of making a documentary for Lyric FM, for the Lyric feature on Rita. And it's an astonishing story. It's an astonishing story of wonderful women. Her mother, herself, her daughters, amazing. A wonderful marriage. Her husband, Rita's husband, Pat, is just... He's the kind of man any woman would have wanted, honestly. Great. He's a character in this story. And then the house here in Macroom, Parkview, is like a character in the story as well. But what was astonishing, when I went to meet Mary, first of all, and I was very kind of, I'm not from Cork, but one of the first things I noticed about Cork was people talk about everybody in Cork as being amazing. They're all brilliant. So you kind of take it with a grain of salt, because I'd never heard of Rita Lynch. So, and of course, she wasn't from Dublin, you see. And I sort of thought, this is more of this Cork thing. They're going to say, oh, yeah, she was an amazing singer. And I just thought, well, if she was such an amazing singer, I'd have heard of her, Well, when I went out to Mary's and I saw the material that she had and heard The Last Rose of Summer, that just put goose pimples on. It's the most beautiful voice. But the story is such an extraordinary story of a woman of that time. And when you hear of the years that she was operating in, and the voices of the woman who interviewed her when she went to America, just how different that time was. Her describing to the Americans Macroom, her bravery about going off to do her concerts, leaving her husband and son and obviously a great mother to look after things while she was gone. It's a fantastic story. And then a woman who had absolutely no regrets about giving up what could have been an extraordinary career, without a doubt. I have no doubt about that. But she was a fantastic family woman, and then to live into her 90s and do all the things that she did. So she spans so many generations. And then the project that Mary took on was so fascinating, because we all have intentions about doing the scrapbooks or tidying up the photographs and all. You'd want to see the amount of material that Mary had. And one question I asked her for the documentary was, does it sort of get too much for you coming in and trying to tidy out all these boxes? And she'd say, sometimes I feel completely overwhelmed by it. Sometimes it's too emotional. Sometimes I have to walk away. Now, Mary also has a brilliant husband, by the way, because he's put up with all these boxes of all the stuff in the house for so long. But she really did the most extraordinary job of archiving. And then the library came into it, because in Cork we have a treasure in our librarian there, Kitty Buckley, who just retired recently, who has been a real treasure for people who love listening to music. And Mary will take on the story of where it all went in, and for me ended up in a documentary that was called Digitizing Rita. It brought the story right from back in the 1930s. right through to this project being digitised by the library service and the university. Can I introduce you to the marvellous, one of Rita Lynch's wonderful daughters, to tell you all, Mary Davis, Mary Shaw Lynch. Oh, by the way, before Mary starts, it's really significant having this event here tonight because Father Sidney McKeown features in the story of Rita, and he performed here in the Briery Gap back in 1956, and he told the audience that he was singing a song for a special lady, a lady that he loved, and she was a lady called Mary Shaw. And of course, Rita Lynch was married to Pat Shaw, and her daughter was Mary Lynch, or Mary Shaw, Mary Lynn Shaw. And of course, there's a beautiful song that Sidney McKeown sang that night called Mary Shaw. So here she is in person, Mary Lynch Shaw Davis.
Thank you, Evelyn, very much. That was a lovely introduction to the whole night, indeed, and lovely introduction to bringing Rita home. And we really did want to finish the centenary celebrations here in her hometown of Macroom, of which she was so proud and which she loved very, very much. So we're here tonight to celebrate her. She'd actually laugh. She was born on the 14th of the 2nd of December 1914. So the centenary celebration was actually the 2nd of December 2014, and it's taken us, but she was a little bit late for lots of things in her life, especially in later life, so she'd laugh at it. And the other thing is that she absolutely hated February. Absolutely hated February so much that we always refer to her as the February Queen. She wanted February to be over with, and so she could enjoy the spring and everything. So anyway, here we are, bang in the middle of February. And going back to the archive, I just want to say that the beautiful storyboards there, they were pulled from the archive, which has got 2,000 pieces in it. And those were done by Eileen Hegarty, who was a master's student and who was assigned the job of putting the story together. She did a fantastic job. That was under Dr. Orla Murphy, who's the Digital Humanities Department, UCC. So I want to thank, while I'm talking, I'm thanking them as we go through this, because without all these people, this wouldn't have happened. So that's Orla Murphy, UCC, Eileen Hegarty, UCC, Kitty Buckley, and her successor, Mary Fitzgerald, who's a Macroom person, and she's here as well tonight. To thank them very much, Liam Ronan of the library in Cork as well. And the two people who took two very old acetate discs and got the material in them, and that was a very difficult thing to do. That's Harry Bradshaw from Dublin and Tig Keller, who's with us tonight, and I want to say a special thanks to Tig. He's done fantastic work, absolutely brilliant. His skill and expertise is second to none. So between Harry and Tig, we were able to put the music together for the CD, which we have here tonight as well. And the music on the CD covers a period from 1948 to 1976. So that's 28 years of Rita music on the CD, which is very interesting. And it was songs which were broadcast in the States in 1949, records that were made in London 1948, and some private recordings done in the 60s, and right up to her last public performance, which was in the City Hall in Cork on the centenary of, we won't mention it because it's a political thing, the 50th anniversary of one of the political parties in 1976 in Cork. And because we're in the run-up to election, I won't mention it. But I do have to say that Jack Lynch was a personal friend of Rita's. So she sang at that, and Lord Longford did the oration that night. So I want to thank Harry Bradshaw, Tig Kelleher, also Cara O'Sullivan, who sent a message here tonight to wish us all well. Cara sent me a message last night. She actually rang me because she said that if she sent a text, I wouldn't believe her. She has terrible throat at the moment, and she's got laryngitis. So she couldn't be here and sent her best wishes. As did Magella Culla, rang me as well, and to wish us all well for this occasion. I also want to mention Eddie Hogan, who's with us. Eddie, you were a great inspiration to Rita, and you are a gentleman. And Jim Ahern and the late Jerry O'Callaghan, who were three gentlemen who, during Rita's late 70s and early 80s, brought her around and introduced her to gramophone circles. So she got a great thrill out of coming and going in cars to places like Bandon and Macroom and places in Cork to play music and to talk about her life. And Eddie, of course, was instrumental in Rita getting the Irish Heritage Vocal Heritage Society medal, and that was the Margaret Birch Sheridan medal in 1995, I think, wasn't it? So thank you for that. I have to mention Evelyn. I know she's mentioned herself, but I'm going to mention her as well. She's one of our radio treasures, without a doubt. And I also want to mention that she has been, along with Cara and a number of others, a most wonderful support to me, encouragement. Her professionalism is just immeasurable, and she's just a lovely, lovely, helpful person, a very good person. And I have to say, Evelyn, if you don't know it already, Evelyn now has 2 slots on Lyric FM at the weekend. 2 slots, which is wonderful. Congratulations, Evelyn, on that. She's on at 4 o'clock on Saturday and 4 o'clock on Sunday on Lyric FM. And I think the only other female broadcaster who has 2 slots at the weekend is Marion Finucane. And not even Miriam has 2 slots at the weekend. And we are very proud of you, Evelyn, genuinely. Genuinely very proud of Evelyn. So that's the thanks. We're going back to the storyboards. They run from her early life in Macroom, from Parkview, and right to her later life as doing some painting and some interesting work she was doing with the gramophone circles. So if you have time to look at those, it'll bring you through her whole life. We're going to play some snippets going back to 1949 now. And what we're going to do is going to talk very briefly and let you hear some of the broadcasts that went out live in America while she was on her American tour. So we'll start with the Michael O'Duffy show in New York in 1949, where Michael introduces Rita, and Rita sings She's Far From the Land, and then Michael comes in again and they sing together. So we'll hear those now. These are very special recordings because we didn't even know they existed really until a few years ago.
The Mutual Broadcasting System takes pleasure in presenting the brilliant young Irish tenor, Michael O'Duffy.
The cry dawn is breaking, the horn of the hunter is heard on the hill.
It's pleasant to have you with us again for another half hour with Michael O'Duffy, a fine young singer with a program of familiar songs for you, with the orchestra under the direction of Sylvan Levin. Michael has a guest with him for this program, a charming young compatriot of his, Rita Lynch.
And I do indeed have a delightful guest visiting with me for this program. She's an old friend of mine from Ireland, Rita Lynch, who arrived in America just in time for St. Patrick's Day for a visit and to include several concert appearances. Rita's very well known in Ireland and has been ever since she won a singing competition sponsored by Radio Erin with the blessings of the late John McCormick. Since then, she's sung in many concerts and broadcast frequently from Radio Erin and the BBC. Her records are very popular at home too. It's grand indeed to have Rita with us today and to have her sing She Is Far From the Land. Rita. Last time Rita Lynch and I sang together was very nearly a year ago in Liverpool. We sang a concert there together, and certainly if we had been told then that the next time we'd be singing together would be here on the Mutual Network, well, we wouldn't have believed it. It's grand to have this reunion with her on this programme. And here now is a delightful song by Thomas Moore which we will sing together, The Young May Moon.
The glowworm's lamp is gleaming, love. How sweet to roll through Marna's grove. while the drowsy world is dreaming alone.
Then awake, the heavens look bright, my dear. 'Tis never too late, but it's time, my dear. And what best of all ways to lengthen our days is to steal a few hours from the night, my dear. Now all the world is sleeping, love, but the face is somewhat keeping love. And I who saw the glory of the heart is the eye from that casement keeping love.
Then awake till rise of sun, my dear. The sage's glass will shun, my dear. For in watching the flight of bodies of light, he might happen to take thee for one, my dear. Then awake till rise of sun, my dear. The sage's glass will shun, my dear. For in watching the flight of bodies of light, he might happen to take thee for one, my dear. He might happen to take thee for one, my
It's a fabulous voice, isn't it? Absolutely gorgeous. And she was one of 9, Mary, isn't that right, in the family? Reared out in Parkview.
In Parkview, one of 9, and she had 4
only
brothers,
girl.
and then herself, and then 4 more brothers.
Extraordinary. This is what I love about her mother, finding this talent and just making sure that, you know, she didn't end up
And
not being able to develop
I think actually I better just hop in here for a minute, because the talent was found especially, first of all, here in the Mercy Convent in Macroom, but secondly, among the Ursuline sisters, the Ursuline nuns, and we have 2 of them here tonight, Mother Mary Sister Mary MacDade, I still say Mother, because it's more normal to me, and Sister Mary Hurricane, 2 Ursulines here in the front row, and we're absolutely thrilled that they're here because she meant so much to them, and I know they meant an awful lot to her as well. So that was where it was really discovered with Sister Peter. And as here in the front row, I didn't mention, I should have, my 2 sisters, and some of you have met them already, because you know them already, Rita McGeady from Dublin and Celeste Murphy from Cork. Celeste and Marita, my 2 sisters.
What we were fascinated by was how all the dates in Rita's life, things seemed to happen to her personally in these really momentous global years. You know, 1914 she was born. 1939 she won the big competition. 1949, when she got this opportunity to go to America, was still there. Months later she sang at a dinner in Chicago where Sean McBride was in Chicago because it was the official launch of the Republic, the official day of whatever date that was in April. And just that whole Irish-American feeling at the time as well, and the kind of language that's in some of the write-ups and everything. It's an extraordinary history, really. But to hear her tell her own story to the very American voice of the lady who introduces woman in the news, and Rita Lynch is her guest. I think that's our next clip. Am I right, Mary?
And now on Topic Time, our regular feature, Woman in the News. Today's honours go to a visitor from Ireland, Miss Rita Lynch, who has been a guest in Brockton at the home of Mr. and Mrs. John Collins of 72 Winthrop Street. Welcome to Topic Time, Miss Lynch.
Thank you, Freddie.
Miss Lynch is here on Topic Time in a green dress, by the way, in case you're interested, listeners, to tell you her own story in her own very delightful voice about some of her experiences lately. Miss Lynch, we'd like to hear the whole story of what occasioned your visit to the United States from Macroom, County Cork in Ireland.
In Ireland, I'm a professional singer and I do a lot of radio work. And WGN, broadcasting station in Chicago, we're getting up a special St. Patrick's Night program. So they cabled to the radio station in Dublin for an Irish singer, a woman singer. And they asked me would I go, and I said certainly. I always wanted to go to America.
So she went to America, and she flew over, and you'll see there was an emergency on the plane on the way. I won't go through all the story, because Evelyn said to me yesterday, she said, no padding. So we'll go back to those stories afterwards, because we need to get through this little bit. But there are 3 little snippets which we're going to play for you here. In the same interview here, she talks about her first day in Chicago. Her first day, she was brought here, there and everywhere. And the second, now I don't know how she did it, even being young, what she did in Chicago, day 1. Day 2 is her first time seeing television, was seeing herself on television. First time she ever saw television. The next one was she went on a train journey from New York to Chicago because she wanted to see the countryside. And they talk about how big the countryside is compared to Ireland. We'll take those now.
First of all, in the morning, I had an interview on the radio. After that, I did a television newsreel. Then I sang at the Irish Fellowship Club luncheon. After that, I had to rehearse for my broadcast. I did my broadcast about 9 o'clock. After that, I went to an Irish club and sang there. And I finished up that night at Loyola University picking a beauty queen. And I happened to pick an Irish girl.
You didn't know she was Irish?
No, I didn't.
And of all the girls that paraded before you, hoping to be elected queen, you chose an Irish girl. Just sisters under the skin, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, you spoke about being on television yourself. Do you have television in Ireland?
No, we haven't got any in Ireland.
Had you ever seen it before? Perhaps in England?
No, I never saw it until I saw myself in television.
Played back?
Yes.
In the form of a film?
Yes.
Well, how did you like yourself? And what do you think of television in general?
I like it very much. Really, I do. Of course.
I mean, did you look different to yourself?
Well, I suppose I did. I thought I would really hardly recognize myself.
How long did you stay in Chicago?
I stayed in Chicago about 2 weeks. Then I flew back to New York for another radio engagement. And having spent 2 more weeks there, I went to Chicago again.
Oh!
I got some more singing engagements there, so I went back by train this time. I wanted to travel in an American train and to see some of the countryside.
Well, what is your impression of the American trains in the American countryside?
Well, I thought the trains were just wonderful, really, I did. So comfortable, and the service was grand on it. And
is the United States bigger than you imagined, Miss Lynch?
Yes. Oh, it is much bigger.
It really? Why do you laugh?
Well, I've been told that Ireland the whole of Ireland is just about the same size as the state of Illinois.
And the vastness of America really impressed you then?
It did, certainly.
Well, tell us then, you've been traveling between Chicago and New York. What happened to you then?
Then I was asked back to New York, and from there I was asked to come to Boston.
And what did you do in Boston?
I sang at the Pops concert on Wednesday night.
And who was leading the Pops that particular night? None other than
Arthur Fiedler
himself. What did you sing for Pops? Could you tell us, Miss Lynch?
Well, it was Irish night at the Pops, so I sang all Irish songs. I did Denny Boy, the Kerry Dance, a little Irish song called the Ninepence Fiddle, and then I finished up with the popular Galway Bay.
And the last part of this interview, she talks about her cousins in Brockton, in Boston, and Brockton near Boston. And she also talks about Lucy's from Macroom. And then she talks about, she's asked about whether we've got movie houses over here. So this is the last part of the same interview.
Well, I had a very nice day yesterday. First of all, we went to see the Plymouth Rock. And then last night, I met a whole lot of people from my hometown. But what really excited me most was meeting some cousins whom I never knew existed.
Oh, my word.
Tim Lucy of Plain Street.
Right here
his
in
family.
Brockton?
Right here in Brockton.
Good.
And,
do you have any close relatives in this country? Any immediate family?
No, the nearest would be a first cousin in California, but I hadn't time to see her. I spoke to her twice on the telephone.
Oh, good. Well, what number of cousins are the Lucys here of Brockton?
Well, Tim Lucy would be a first cousin of my grandmother Lynch.
Oh,
Quite far out, you know.
yes, but it's still a tie. When you go back to your hometown in Macroom, County Cork, what is the main thing that impressed you most about the United States that you're going to tell them back home?
I think really the friendliness of the people here.
Is that the truth?
Yes, I found everybody so nice. I really did. They accepted me, invited me to their homes, and even people I met in business through my singing were all so kind and nice, friendly.
What kind of a town is your hometown? How big is it?
It's a very little town, really, about 2,000 population.
And what's the principal occupation there?
It's in the middle of a big dairy country, dairy produce, farming. We haven't got any industries in the town, no factories.
Do you have a movie house there?
Oh, sure, we have one.
You have one?
Yes.
Do they show American movies there often?
Oh, they do.
How often? How many times a week, did you say?
They show a film every night except Saturdays.
A film every night except Saturdays?
Yes.
Why not Saturday nights?
I don't know, really.
Do they show them on Sundays?
Oh, they do on Sundays. I think Saturday night is the night where everybody gets scrubbed up for Sunday.
Well, if they show a film every night, how often do they change the picture? Once a week?
3 times a week. Oh, yes.
And about how many of those would be American films?
Well, I should think about 95%.
Oh, really?
American. I think so, yes.
Well, tell me, do they have what they call double features over there? That is, do they show 2 pictures at one showing?
Yes, they do.
We want to thank you once again, Miss Rita Lynch, for taking time out. By the way, that's your professional name, isn't it?
Yes.
What is your married name?
Shaw.
Mrs.
Shaw.
Mrs. Shaw.
Yes.
Well, Miss Rita Lynch, alias Mrs. Shaw, we want to thank you once again for taking time out to come here this afternoon, and we'll be following your career. And if we ever get to Ireland, we're going to look you up.
Thank you, Freddie. I'll be delighted to see you.
Thank you once again.
And they're fantastic little gems of interviews to have. I was completely, and playing them for my own kids at home as well. Just the sound of them even is just so fascinating. And the American voice and Rita's voice. Then Mary has recordings of Rita's speaking voice right across until she's into her 80s as well. But what was wonderful was that in the archive there's the letters. The first batch of letters that was absolutely amazing to read was when she won the 1939 competition. And when you see the excitement and the Twitter and the Facebook and all this about The Voice nowadays, you know, the television program, the talent competition, this one, and I mean, it's not that long ago either, but it's like a different world altogether. She actually has letters describing people walking in to Macroom and passing a house where the radio was on, and people were gathered around the radio listening, so excited about it. People who wrote to her in Macroom and just put on the envelope Rita Lynch Macroom, Rita Lynch singer Macroom, and lots of letters that said, "Dear number 9, your voice was such and such and such and such. I know you're going to win." Extraordinary kind of things. They wrote to her in Dublin in the Radio Éireann studios as well, just number 9 in the competition. Absolutely amazing, the interest that was taken. I love, of course, the Saturday night, because I think it was Sunday the competition was on, the final of the competition, and it's described in detail and of course people giving her advice as well to keep her feet firmly on the ground and not have happened to her what happens to a lot of singers, that she would get that dreadful condition known as swollen head. Keep her, Irish people do not like you getting ahead of yourself, even if you are a wonderful singer and winning a lot of competitions. But I love the notion of that on Saturday nights here in Macroom, everybody was getting washed and having their shoes polished to go to Mass the following morning, and then off to the pictures again. But Mary, fill us in on a couple of other, there were so many different fascinating things, the newspapers, the programmes from her operas.
Well, I think the fan mail which you alluded to there was fantastic. She actually got a letter from in the early 1990s, she got a letter from a man who was a Boy Scout in Kerry in Glengariff around 1939, 38, 39, and he was a Boy Scout who heard her singing in the trees. She was on holidays and he was with the Boy Scouts, and he wanted to just say that he had now retired and he was thinking back on his life, and he just wanted to write down that it was a lovely experience for him. But here tonight I want to show you these two costumes. I just want to explain them. The one on the left, actually, we're not sure by process of elimination, it could have been Josephine, not sure about that. On the right, it's Gretel in the Gaiety Theatre of 1944, and the picture is here of her in the costume. That's the actual costume. So it survived, and it's still here with us. So that's an interesting thing.
That opera by Engelbert Humperdinck, actually the original Engelbert Humperdinck, Hansel and Gretel, was one of, we were stunned at this when we saw the programmes from the 1940s where the Dublin Grand Opera Society would do several operas in the 1 week. It's so expensive to put opera on, and nowadays it's such a chore trying to get funding for opera. But back in the day, they managed to do, they would do the Barbara Seville one day, they'd do the Marriage of Figaro the next day. They did about 4 or 5 in a season, didn't they?
Oh, they did indeed.
And then she had this fantastic history with the Messiah as well, where she did that. Will you give us the dates there?
The date was 1942, and she sang the solo part in the bicentennial. That's the 200th anniversary of the first performance of the Messiah, in 1942. And she was a present on 1992. 50 years later, she was present in Dublin, and she was brought on stage, which was 50 years later, which was something else.
And Cara Sullivan actually sang the role.
Yes, Cara sang the role that night, which was lovely. But coming back here to Macroom, there are a few people in the audience who played a real part. There's Joni Garvin there. Joni Garvin worked in Parkview, 1955, 56. Imagine that.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, and there's somebody else. There are two people here, Michael Kelleher and Mary Kelleher. Are they here? And can you tell us your story? Were you present at one of her concerts, is it? Was that here, Michael? Or was it in?
The castle.
The castle grounds. At the castle ballroom. And she was singing, is it? Oh, Dixon Collins. And there's a telegram. I don't know whether it went into the exhibition case, which is down there, and most of it has to do with Macroom. Excuse me now, I'm pointing, but it's down there on the left. But there is a telegram from Dixon, with just Dixon in the end of it, 1939. And a lot of telegrams from Macroom at that particular time.
And of course, one of the things from the 1939 competition was that she was meant to have gone to study. This was meant to be part of the prize, that she would have gone to Italy. Now, her life could have been completely different. I mean, if you listen to Veronica Dunn speaking recently on John Bowman's programme, and actually Ronnie Dunn is very upfront. I often laugh at it. She has children herself who are well used to their mother, and they know exactly what they're going to hear. But like, she talks always about, any talented young singer should not have a family. You know, you can't have all of this kind of thing. And but she talked on John Bowman's programme there last Sunday about her time in Italy being the best couple of years of her life. But there was the famous story about that, of course, because of the years of the war, and that she wasn't sent to Italy. It never happened. And a great story that she told several times on radio herself about meeting Margaret Sheridan in Dublin.
She was walking down one of the roads in the centre of Dublin, and she bumped into Margaret Sheridan, which she always called her Miss Sheridan. And Miss Sheridan said, "Oh, hello, Rita. How are you getting on?" And Rita said, "Oh, I'm getting on fine, Miss Sheridan. I'm thinking of getting married." Was that the one?
Yeah.
Yes. "How are you getting on?" "I'm getting on fine." And she said, "Well, how are you doing?" "Well," she said, Rita said, "I'm thinking of getting married." And Margaret Burke Sheridan turned around and she said, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Well, yes, I am sure." And I think the more she said it, the more sure she became herself. And she said, "Yes, I am." And Margaret Burke Sheridan stamped her heel, and she was very, very cross that Rita was getting married. But I did hear that Ronnie Dunn piece. Did anybody else hear that the other day? And she said straight out, she was asked the question straight, would you advise anybody, how would you advise them if they're singing and thinking of getting married? And she said, "I'd say to them, don't get married." Simple.
But
as
Rita
that.
always knew exactly what she wanted to do. And Margaret Burke Sheridan, when she stamped her foot, she said, "Damn them anyway." And Rita told the story great to John Creedon on the radio. "Damn the government," she said. "I told them to send you away. And they didn't. Damn them anyway." We're not. But she's very determined. And Pat Shaw wooed her, went to the Cork Opera House to see her perform. And the fella he was with said there was some connection. Pat thought he knew somebody that knew Rita. "Well, why don't you go behind and, see if you can?" And he did. He went back to the stage door and he chatted her up and invited her out to tea in the Imperial Hotel they went to?
They went to the Victoria the next day.
And famously, when the Opera House burnt down in 1955, that wasn't it?
Yeah.
Pat Shaw drove in and took from the ruins of it the lintel of one of the
Stage
doors
Yeah.
and put it into the building of their house. Isn't that gas?
So he was
connection.
he was a true romantic, really. Look, here we are, and the rose.
But the reason I talk about her mother as well is that her mother kind of reared the 9 children herself. I mean, her husband died when
they were all very young.
When they were very young.
1924. He died in 1924.
So she reared the whole family herself. And then when it came to Rita being married, having a child, and getting this opportunity to go to America, obviously both Pat and her mother said, "You've got to take your chance, off you go." Despite she was flying at one stage with blacked out windows and stuff like
during the war. I mean,
fairly scary times.
It very much so. I mean, this beggars belief. She was flying back and forth to concerts in the UK, Birmingham, Manchester, London, and she was flying with blackened out windows on the aircraft. And she just did it. I mean, it's quite. And she did describe. She said it. She said the airplanes felt as if they were being held together by twine. That's the way she described it. But it didn't stop her. She still did it.
But the story of her, the plane emergency is definitely worth hearing. This is when she's on her way to what we were just listening to there in America.
When they took off from Shannon and Dad dropped her off. She went off in the plane and Dad was just about to turn away to drive back home. And he heard 2 of the people working for Aer Lingus. They were looking at this plane which had taken off, and one of them said to the other, "She'll be back." And Dad said, "Excuse me, but what do you mean?" And they were very reticent, and they said very little then. And well, he said, "My wife is on that plane, I need to know." And he said, "Well, I think there's a problem with the wheels." So what happened was they took off, and instead of heading off over the Atlantic, they headed to London because the wheels wouldn't retract. So they flew around London and they burnt up fuel, and eventually they crash landed in London. But during the crash landing, the brakes failed. But while they were up there, Mum was sitting next to this American lady, and the American lady began to get nervous, and she said, "Would you mind saying the rosary with me?" And Rita said, "I will, but I'll be back in a minute." So she got up, took her bag, and went back to the ladies behind. And she went into the loo. She looked at herself in the mirror and she said, "If I'm going down, I'm going to go down looking my best." And she put on her makeup and she came back, sat in her seat, and she said, "Now I'll say the rosary with you." And the plane, meantime, then crash landed in London, and they were given another plane Most of them went on it, some of them didn't. And they flew back to Shannon. And they landed again in Shannon. And that was the first time she took an alcoholic drink. They were given a whiskey, I think, in Shannon. So she took the whiskey and they headed off. And she sent a telegram to Pat, her husband, back in Shannon safely. I'll telegram again from Gander. Don't tell Ma if you think so. So they decided not to tell her mother in Macroom, but of course it was all over the papers then because it was syndicated. The story was syndicated by a Reuters, so she eventually heard anyway.
But there was a letter in the archives, or a little card, you know, one of those that you'd get from the airline. Everything marvellous here. Having a great time, super flight, wonderful, everything's fantastic. And then beside that, there's all these newspaper, like it was big news. And the captain, he was a Captain Hofstetler, was it?
Captain Hostetler.
Hostetler, yeah.
He
written up everywhere.
Yes, and he was put, and they were all written to. Everybody who went on the plane was written to, especially afterwards, on account of the emergency. But it's there on the storyboards. Actually, it's very well done about the emergency.
So she did actually end up missing the Paddy's Day event that she went out for by the time she had all this drama with the aircrafts and that. But then she got an opportunity to stay on longer. I said to Mary when we were making the documentary, I said, did your dad ever worry about her not coming back? And Mary just said, no, I think he was fairly sure she would come back. It's fascinating when you think of Brooklyn, the film even, that whole, different life over there, and she doing her singing with those amazing orchestral arrangements and that. Fabulous stuff. Great story as well, though, the real story that happens to every Irish person abroad when she met Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops Orchestra. I love this one.
But he said that there's only one person he knew in Ireland, Arthur Fiedler. And Rita said, and who would it be? And thinking, couldn't possibly be somebody that she'd know. And he said, yes, I know one person. She's a singer. She was in America last year. Her name is Jean Nolan. And Rita said, Jean Nolan? She's my singing teacher in Dublin. So the world is very small.
But back she did come, and what fascinated me about Rita's life after the singing was how she had this second musical life through the gramophone circles, and very attached to Jerry and Jim, and then later on took to painting, golf, mad into the rugby as well, wasn't she? The whole lot.
Was, yes.
Until
the Heineken Cup visited her. It did actually, yes. Celette's husband Don was involved with the rugby, and the Heineken Cup came to her in 2000. The first time they won it, I can't give you a date. Shifra, there's Rita's granddaughters, Shifra, Clodagh, and Rachel Davis at the back of the room. But when was
2006?
2006.
Yeah,
you're right. Actually, yeah. You brought it down to her.
But there was a gentleman who's just had to go to work there, Michael Goulding from Macroom, and Michael came over to tell us that his mother had worked for Rita in a shop that Rita set up on the Glasheen Road. Now, we got to this making the documentary as well, and Mary said, oh yes, that's the story that we used to describe in the family as the unmentionable. Tell us about the unmentionable.
The unmentionable was never meant to be mentioned, you see, but that's why it is called the unmentionable. I think her mother died, Mary Lynch died in 1957. And Mrs. Lynch and that's our granny, and Rita were great friends. They really were great friends. They were like sisters. She describes it in one of the interviews as her mum was like her sister. And she died in 1957, and shortly after this, I think Rita got a bit of a brainstorm or something when she decided she'd go into business. Wasn't really her forte. But she went into business, and they bought a shop on the top of Highfield Avenue on Magazine Road. Now, she was wonderful with the people. Absolutely wonderful.
Performing behind the counter.
She was so nice. But I do remember this, that if she had somebody who wasn't paying the bills, And you see, in those days, you had your little notebook and the tick and the rest of it. And she hadn't paid. And she'd steal herself and she'd say, I'll get Mrs. So-and-so, and I'm just going to sit her down. I'm going to tell her, I'm just going to do it. So Mrs. So-and-so would come in and she'd bring her around the back, and everybody would stay away for a while, 20 minutes or half an hour, and then we'd creep in. And they'd be Mrs. So-and-so, and she'd be having tea and biscuits and everything else. And then afterwards you'd say, Mum, did you do business? Did you get the money? No, but the story was awful, and I couldn't. So that happened over and over again. But it was a very interesting period in her life. She always said that it was the most wonderful education. And actually, one of the people who used to come in, working for Thompson's Bakery and delivering bread and cakes, was Bill O'Connell.
All right.
And Billa used to come in and they had great chat. So she was wonderful with the people, but hated the business. And we were there 3.5 years. And then moved out to Model Farm Road. And we settled in there very, very happily. Lovely, quiet. It was all country and all. It was lovely. And the odd time we'd run in. We used to be playing games. We'd run and say, Mum, you're wanted in the shop. And she'd hop up and she'd...
Well, Michael's mum was Joan Horgan, there's been so many connections made through this year of remembering Rita. But I said at the very beginning the Parkview here in Macroom, and you can see on one of the boards a picture of the house itself. But it's a character in itself. And just before we finish up with another song from Rita, tell us a little bit of one or two of the stories of Parkview.
Well, I was trying to think, I didn't have to think very much, but which would I tell? But there were one or two very interesting ones going back to the Black and Tans. And the house is on the west end of the town, for those of you who don't know it. And where the road splits going to Mill Street and Killarney, that big square house is Parkview. So it was a strategic kind of spot. And the British Army wanted to commandeer it once. So they took over the house and they sent the family packing. And they had to spend one night in the workhouse. And there again, it was a wonderful, for a child, I suppose, it was a marvellous kind of occasion. And she always described as the first time they had grapes or pineapple. Grapes. First time they were given grapes by the nuns there. They spent one night there and then they were allowed to go back. But it must have been terrifying, and terrifying for the parents. Another story, I think, which is a great one, was that one night they heard the soldiers going back to the old triangle for drinks. And they could hear them walking along the road, no traffic, and they kind of kept quiet. And next thing, there was a bang at the door, looking for money. So Granny Lynch went out and they demanded money. So she gave them the only thing she had in the whole world was a half a crown out of her purse. She gave it to them, closed the door, and she shut the children and said, keep quiet. And the lads went back the road for their drinks in the old triangle. And a couple of hours later, they could hear them coming back up the road. And Granny Lynch kept the kids quiet and the lads passed away. Well, that wasn't the end of the story, because Rita always said the second part was that the officer in charge came the next day and returned the half crown, which was a really nice story. I mean, that was a redemptive part of it. The other part that used to frighten them, I think, very much was coming across the square, the North Square, coming to school. When the Black and Tans were there, they'd come to the square, they'd start walking across, and next thing there was always a shout, get your hands out of your pockets. And the kids, whether they had hands in pockets or not, but the shout always came across the square. So there were interesting times. There was another time that there were two uncles on the run, two Lynch uncles. Were they Lynch uncles? Yes. Two Lynch uncles on the run. And the army decided to search Parkview. So they came in, and again the 9 children were sent scattering or under the beds or something. But there was upstairs, there was a most beautifully ornate commode in one of the rooms. And it looked as if there was a drawer in the front with a knob in it. It was beautifully carved. Anyway, the officer came in and he instructed one of the soldiers to open the commode, and the soldier went over, and the kids were watching, and the soldier went over to pull out the drawer. Of course, the drawer wouldn't come out because it wasn't a drawer. So after a while, Granny Lynch stepped forward, and she must have been, I mean, she was a performer too. She just pulled open, and all the lads were left looking into the ceramic inside of the commode. So that was, so she was a most wonderful character, and she was ahead of her time, I think. And I mean, I'm repeating now. I said it to Evelyn before that they were both ahead of their time in a way, and certainly Granny Lynch had a most wonderful open mind. She was open-minded. She was fun. And she was a lady of her time, but a lady ahead of her time as well. And I think are we getting towards?
Yeah, indeed, yeah. But she certainly passed that on to Rita, and Rita finished up probably one of the last interviews she did with John Creedon, and he said, "Do you regret anything, Rita, about giving up that marvellous career?" And she says in a very emphatic voice, "Absolutely not," she says. And she reams it off. "I have so and so many lovely children. I have so and so many wonderful in-laws, grandchildren, great-grandchildren." And she was absolutely, and obviously went from these different chapters in her life and lived in the present all the time and adored it. Never lost her roots in Macroom. Always very drawn back here, and lots of beautiful photographs of her coming back to Macroom. But anyway, we thought we should finish with
Home Sweet Home. And before we just play it, I know Evelyn mentioned The Last Rose of Summer, which I don't know whether Tyke is lined up or not. The Last Rose of Summer.
But Home Sweet Home anyway.
We'll do Home Sweet Home.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Before we go, please don't go away. Stay and chat. We'll have something to chat about, and we have some tea and coffee and wine and everything. And to thank you most sincerely for coming out on this very, very special occasion, and to wrap up the centenary event. But you'd never know, we might do something again at another time. But it's really special to be here. And thank you very much to the library, to Lorraine, Nora, Christine back there, and Mary. The library staff have been absolutely fantastic, let me say. Both libraries in Macroom and in Cork. And to finish here, Lorraine, is fantastic. You've been a true star. Thank you very much for all your help. It's been a wonderful occasion. And thank you, special people of Macroom, for being here tonight.
And final word to Rita Lynch herself.
The
I have to say after that, and I think that's just gorgeous myself. I have to say that that song was her own, what I'd call her heart song. I think it genuinely, well, I'm not saying that now because being here, I think it was. I think that she loved that song herself. And finally, I want to thank again Evelyn for being here tonight. I want to say though that her making that documentary, the Friday feature, is absolutely a fantastic hours listening. You can get it on the Lyric FM website, Friday feature.
Lyric feature.
Lyric feature. And if you go to the web page, on the right-hand side, there's an archive. Click on archive and go back to the 9th of October 2015. And you can listen to the documentary, Digitizing Rita, which is really, really well done. Thank you again. And thank you all, folks, very, very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Tea, chat and a glass of wine.